Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about the system. So we refer to it as the system icon, but essentially the system is just a centralized location that focuses on our device. In Windows 10, it's kind of more about the About section, but common settings are in both. Normally, you can do things like Windows Edition, system hardware, computer name, workgroup and domain-based settings, activation, and you can access other features like device manager, remote settings, system properties, and other things. So it's important to be able to understand how to use this feature. Alright, so let's look at these more in depth. The Windows Edition section shows the edition of Windows the machine is currently installed. The edition will also show whether a service pack is installed. The system will show processor, memory, system type, as well as pen and touchscreen availability. The computer name, domain, and workgroup settings will be in the computer name, domain, and workgroup settings section, and you can change the name of the system. You can set a description. You can also have Windows 10 work as part of a domain or a Azure cloud-based domain based off of whatever options you want set. Activation section. This will be the Windows 10 activation section, which will allow you to activate your version of Windows 10 operating system as well as change your product key before you activate. If you're looking to the left side of the system window, you will see there are 4 additional things like device manager, system settings, properties, and advanced settings, which we're going to explore a little more. Device manager icon will allow you to configure different devices like optical drives, display adapters, NICs. Remote settings will allow you to configure remote assistance and remote desktop for Windows 10. The system protection will allow you to configure restore points and recoverability for Windows 10. You can also manage disk space as well as restore points from this location. Alright, before I show you, I also want to cover the advanced system settings one more time. There are 3 more main sections for the advanced system settings: performance, profiles, startup, and recovery. These are really important areas. Performance will show you the section allowing you to configure the visual effects and the virtual memory, processor scheduling, data execution prevention for Windows 10. The virtual machine setting or the virtual memory section is going to be based off of how much hard drive space that RAM can use for a paging file. As RAM fills up, you may actually have to copy things out of RAM onto the hard drive. Not so common in Windows 10, but in older machines with limited amount of resources, this type of virtual memory became extremely important. We also have the data execution prevention. This is found underneath the settings option. Helps protects against damage from viruses and other security threats. We also have the user profile section. This will allow us to define, copy, delete, or move profiles from one location to another. Lastly, we have our startup and recovery section. This will allow us to configure which OS will be booted by default. If we're dealing with a dual boot based system, this is extremely important. So, let's jump in and see what we can do. Alright, so all of this, you used to be able to go to this PC, right click, go to properties. That used to take you where you wanted to go. Now it loads the About Us section in the settings. But you can still see the same thing. Device name, here's the processor, installed memory, the pen and touchpad. If we want to rename the PC, here's the edition, here's the version, here's the specific OS build. If you scroll down, you can also look at changing the product key. So here's where you're going to be looking at some of the older settings: device manager, remote desktop, system protection, advanced system settings, and rename this PC. So I'm going to rename this PC first. So I'm going to set this off to the side. So this is system property, what it used to look like. You have the description. This is not where you name the computer. Everyone likes to put the name there, but they don't read that it says description. You change the name right here where it says to rename this computer, click change. You rename it here. Here's also where you could join a domain, modify a work group. We also have the ability to manipulate the DNS if we want to. Way outside the scope of today's topic, but you can. Underneath our hardware, we have our device manager. We've already looked at that in a previous video. We have the advanced section. Here's our performance, user profiles, startup and recovery. You can set what type of features there are. So you can actually set for best performance. And you'll start noticing everything looks way more blocky. That's because best performance normally means not the best view. You'll notice we have softer edges, things are more translucent, things are just more flowy. Again, it all depends on what you like. You also have the advanced. You can choose how the processor handles things. You can set virtual memory. Normally I would be setting virtual memory to a fixed amount, and it was probably 1.5 times my memory. But again, this was all if you needed to do this. It would be if you had very little memory and we're outside that realm. This is when I had like 1 gig or 2 gigs of memory. I'd be setting 3 gigs of a page file. Data execution prevention. We can turn on or turn off DEP. Normally it's turned on for just Windows Core services. That's fine. System I take that back. Go back to advanced. We talked about performance. Now let's talk about user profiles. This is where our user profiles are stored, and the size of them. You can also modify them. You also have the ability to play with startup and recovery. If you had multiple OSs, you could do it here. If you were talking a system failure, you could do a memory dump and you could list the location. If your PC does blue screen, or you do have like a dual boot based system, you can actually set the timers that whatever time you want. System protection, this is going to be our restore point. I have it turned off, but you can turn it on. We are going to be talking about this in a more advanced setting in a later video covering more of the advanced settings. And lastly, we have our remote tab. You have remote assistance and remote desktop, and you have the tools to play with the advanced settings as well as which users. In the system setting, you can do the exact same thing, but you're going to be doing it through the systems settings as opposed to the system properties. Same thing, just different locations. Alright, so the important part here, how do you rename a PC? Well, make sure when you're renaming it that you're in the right location, and one, you're not changing the description, you're renaming the actual PC. So computer name. We'll go home here. I will go to the about, rename. So you'll notice slightly different views. System property gives you this. Settings give you this. I want to rename it. I want to add an A at the end. Because it's too long, it may give you a NetBIOS warning. And it will get a prompt. Because I already renamed it, it says name's invalid. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the default name that they had. And again, when this was loaded, this detected this as the name. If you go back and you modify it, it still thinks you've changed the name. You have to restart for this name to take effect. Because otherwise, it's still going to think this is the name. So it doesn't really matter which tool you use. They both do generally the same thing. It's more of a specifically which tool do you like the most. More things are moving to the settings section, so you need to learn the settings section. The system property is the old way of doing things, and it's going away. I like to tell people, make sure to do a description, especially in the business realm, because this is going to be really helpful when you have to manage hundreds or thousands of computers. Alright, so that was all I had for looking at the systems icon or the system settings. So this is a quick review of the system settings in a nutshell. If you have any questions, any concerns, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.